Now all of a sudden, well, I mean, lots of people have published on SEO. There's lots of research and we can get to a certain baseline. So now we're operating at a higher level of abstraction. I think the great part about technology is every innovation allows us to operate at a higher level of abstraction. The first place where it's really useful is just the ingestion of the document. So it turns out that Gemini 2 is sensational at ingesting PDFs and parsing it out accurately. Within 2 or 3 years, the number of SDRs as a role will diminish, and it's either by like 70 to 90% or more.
All right, well, Tom, thanks for joining me today. Great to see you.
You too. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. Before we start, do you want to say a few words? Most people know you as a venture investor at Redpoint for a long time, but what are you up to right now?
Yeah, we started a firm called Theory. We're about 7 people, raised about a little less than 700 million, and invest in anything to do with data and AI. So databases, applications, infrastructure, and then blockchains.
Awesome. Well, you and I have known each other for a long time, and one of the things that I know about you and where I wanted to start was that you're a tinker and you're always like trying new technologies. And I want to talk specifically about AI in your personal work. And I asked this question because one of the things that I'm puzzled by as somebody who's worked in AI for a long time, I remember when our family got DSL in like 1999 and like, I could not believe it instantly changed my life, completely changed my life. Same thing with like when I got an iPhone. And I'm puzzled that there's certainly some things that I use that make me more efficient, but I haven't found anything that's like completely earth-shattering to me like those two things were. And I wonder if I know you have dictated for a long time, but is there anything that's just like fundamentally changed the way that you've worked?
Yeah, so the dictation was the first. So we can speak 3 times faster than we can type. Mm-hmm. And the first wave of dictation tools are literally transcription, right? Record what I'm saying. The next wave of dictation software actually passes that to a large language model. Mm-hmm. And so we'll format it properly, right? We'll bullet the list.
Do rewriting. Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you sound more intelligent than you are, or anyway. And so I think that has been, for me, huge, right? And I wrote a blog post about how I was just tracking my use of AI over the course of a Sunday afternoon, and I was using it about 100 times an hour. And a lot of that is dictation. And it's like little things. Another way I've really love using AI now is I don't really read news articles. I summarize them before reading them. A third way, and this one has saved me a lot of time, but it's less frequent, is when I create a PowerPoint presentation, I will just dictate for 5 minutes and then upload it to something like Claude or Gemini and say, create a presentation from this. I had this management coach at Google who said, whenever you deliver a presentation, there are 3 parts. There's the clearing, which is this is what's on the slide, the content, and then the transition setting up the next slide. And so I ask it to produce that and then give me a prompt that I can put into an image generation service, and then that'll produce the image for the chart, and then export it as Markdown, put it into a program called IA Presenter that accepts Markdown, and the presentation's done.
You've dictated for a long time, and my father was a lawyer, and I remember him growing up speaking into, and he didn't type, so he would speak into a tape machine and then take it to somebody who would like type it up for him.
Yeah,
I find with myself, I can dictate, but my medium of thinking, and maybe this is like I learned by writing, so it's more dictation is fine for me, but when I am thinking deeply on a topic, like preparing for a board meeting or a corporate strategy, like oftentimes I still write long form. It's just like how I think. Do you find that having used dictation, you think equally well, or is like the fidelity of your thinking the same when you dictate?
It depends. There are certain, sometimes it's just a big mess in my mind. And so if you just dump it into the AI and say, structure this, that helps a lot.
Fascinating.
And then what you can do, like, I don't know if you've seen the new Gemini ad, but there's a dad who is interviewing for a job, and he's practicing his interview with Gemini Live, and he's going back and forth. And so I think this like role playing and instant feedback will become ubiquitous within the enterprise. Like there's this mantra, which is we practice in sports, but we don't practice at work. And the very large, like I remember hearing about some of these amazing M&A orgs. Cisco is a legendary M&A org. And I finally met somebody once from Cisco M&A, and I said, how are you guys so good? And he said, well, before we have a single meeting, we practice 6 times. And so I think with AI, like this infinite patience and this much broader memory, I don't know. I think that kind of practicing, even like selling practicing, will become, that's the way we'll train people. That's the way we'll evaluate people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I practice a foreign language by speaking to ChatGPT, the voice assistant, and it's interesting. It doesn't replicate speaking to a human because it kind of, the longer the conversation goes on, obviously like the context, you get sort of, the conversation just kind of goes off the rails at some point. But it is, it's extraordinary. And it does actually help. It doesn't beat the human connection, but you can see that being very valuable.
Yeah, it's like practicing and racing, right? It's really hard to replicate the feeling of a race, the adrenaline, the nervousness on race day.
Yeah.
But it gives you a lot more confidence to know that you've practiced a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good analogy. I was watching this interview with Adrian Newey, who was like the Red Bull car designer.
Incredible book he wrote on how to build a car.
His incredible book, right, that just came out. And he talked about how the problem is very difficult to simulate a human driver in a race car because of you can design the car to do things that people are too fearful to do. So when you were saying that, I was thinking back to the Andy Grove evidently used to have these like conflict sessions with his managers where they would practice like conflict arguments because people don't get enough practice at that. And so you could sort of imagine that being very beneficial.
I have never heard that. That's crazy. But it makes sense. I mean, learning how to manage conflict, it's the essence of management.
It's the essence of management. Yeah. Let's go back in time a little bit, which is there was a whole wave of ML SaaS companies, which is when you and I met, like 2013, 2014, 2015. We called it machine learning back then. We didn't really call it AI. Now we do call it AI. And obviously the models are 1,000x, 1,000,000x better, but it seems like the enthusiasm and interest is 1,000,000,000x more. And I'm also surprised by that, and I think many people in the field were surprised by how suddenly it became mainstream. And there were a bunch of companies that were started, very few of which I think were successful, and now you have a bunch that are ostensibly growing very, very fast. Have you kind of like distilled down what you think is different this time versus last time?
Well, I think, so let's take customer support as an example.
Yeah.
During the NLP, whatever, the previous generation of machine learning, the deflection rates, in other words, the fraction of inbound customer support queries that could be answered by a human were about 20%. And even then, maybe, they weren't 100% accurate. So you're looking at like a 10 or 15% net improvement, which is okay, but like not going to set the world on fire.
Yeah.
Now we're at a place where 80 to 90% deflection rates are common, and the customer satisfaction scores engaging with a robot are significantly higher than humans. And so now it's like you have to move. And I think the major difference is, as you said, like the models are significantly better. People can see the outcomes, and there's both an excitement and a fear. And the fear is, if I don't understand this stuff, I will be irrelevant in a very, very short period of time. I think we should apply some credence to that. I don't think, everybody should panic because we're all learning at the same time. And even people who are at the state of the art are still trying to figure out how to use this stuff in an effective way. But I agree with you. I mean, I had never thought of PR as an effective strategy for early stage B2B companies, because reality is like, as much as I love next generation databases, it's very unlikely that anybody reading the journal is going to want to read like a Series A columnar, whatever. But 12 months ago, you had companies with 3 people in them who had launched the week before who were being covered in the New York Times. And so that was just, to me, indicative of people were really curious. And I think it was really ChatGPT as a product, as accidental as it was, that I think humanized it, right? It's like it's as if you were texting somebody and all of a sudden it came alive.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. So you're kind of making, you're making a tipping point argument in terms of the capability, but then a game theoretic escalation argument that one has to do this because one's competitors are doing it, and the downside of not adopting is higher than the upside of anything that might go wrong in adopting.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the productivity of some of these. I mean, we made this prediction. We think there's a company generate 100 million in AR with like less than 10 people this year.
Yeah,
and
there are a couple of companies that have been close to that already.
Yeah, I think it may happen at the end of the first quarter. Yeah. All right. So we may have massively sandbagged. So I think when you read about those kinds of stories, it's very clear that something has changed dramatically, and you can't hide from that change, right? And so you're either on like one side of history or on another, so to speak. That's maybe a bit too grandiose, but when you read about, and then what I love about America is you have this like, well, why can't it be me? Like, why can't I reinvent my department? Why can't I change the way that my company works? Why can't I start a side hustle that makes $1,000 a month using AI, not knowing how to code? And so there's this huge groundswell that we're all seeing.
Yeah, in some sense, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because if you've got enormous amounts of capital going somewhere, that's where all the smart people go. And if you basically have all the smart people in society and all the capital in society concentrated on one thing, surely something good comes out of that. Something good's going to come out of that.
Well, Spence, you have a PhD from a very fancy, impressive school, and you've seen like the research, right? And, like I think about like research in like these periods of like punctuated equilibrium where research moves, and then you have this like massive breakthrough. And I wake up every morning wondering, will there be some paper or some algorithmic release that will completely change? I mean, we've seen 1,000x reduction in inference costs in the last 2 years. DeepSeek had another 1,000 over 100x effectively. 20x reduction in inference costs. You have Google that just said they have a 5x reduction in inference costs from hardware, not on the algorithmic side. Then you have all this like distillation technology. And so just the pace of innovation is so fast. It's really hard not to want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think you're right. Research does go in these sort of step function breakthrough. That's the history of science. And I remember when the Transformer paper was published in June of 2017, it was immediately obvious that it fixed a lot of problems with recurrent neural networks and neural network training. And we had it implemented in like a week or something like that. It was very unwieldy to get it working at that time. There hasn't been, a lot of the things that you just mentioned are more engineering and systems level changes, like getting things like massively efficient. But it seems like there's a lot more work to do just even on the, I mean, I can't even understand some of the papers these days because they're effectively engineering systems papers, like how to set up a data center to do training with like all these cubes and shards and stuff. Like it's really actually sort of a systems engineering problem. And there just seems like enormous work to do there.
Yeah. It was just a surface area, right? Like you have like distillation, then there's like chain of thought reasoning, then you have like next generation algo. Are you using a diffusion system or using a transformer architecture? Could you use them together? Do you want to use lots of little models or one big model? And then at each one of those steps, there's optimizations for how many head, what's the architecture of the neural network? Are you using, some people are going back to BERT. I was just talking to a company earlier this week where they're saying, well, yeah, actually we can take a lot of what we learned from the transformer architecture, apply it to BERT, and it performs brilliantly. It's tiny.
Yeah. Let's go to let's talk about what this conversation is about enterprise adoption. So when you look at a lot of companies and have looked at a lot of companies for a lot of years, and you mentioned companies that, the potential for a company to go to $100 million in revenue with 10 people, that usually is that usually will happen for a greenfield use case where you're just land grabbing out into infinity. But for a lot of AI applications, it's fundamentally a productivity enhancer. And so it goes into some area where you're changing a business workflow or the way that people work. And that's often rate limited by the rate of change of people. So you mentioned the call center. Are there other areas that you think that are, or you guess you could classify them by greenfield and they're just growing like a weed, or they're more brownfield and they require a bunch of change, but they're still growing really fast and they're very durable? Do you have kind of a mental inventory of that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've seen a lot of innovation in legal, right? Automation of the paralegal workflows.
That's surprising. I mean, legal tech was kind of a dead area for a while, and now it just seems to, be taking off.
Yeah, I think on the whole, if you look, so there's legal, accounting, and code generation. They're just software. So let's just take those three, right? And there are others, but none of those were really exciting for the last decade. Legal software, I mean, you have some great businesses. There's Clio and others, a bunch of e-discovery companies. But not really, decacorn, $10 billion plus. And I think you'll probably see 2 or 3 of those businesses here transforming that industry. Accounting, same thing. And then software coding, I mean, the tools that a software engineer used, I was taught in venture, were uninvestable. You could not, no way, you lose your shirt on a developer tool. And I don't mean like a Twilio, I mean what we call an IDE, an integrated developer environment. But now, like, you look at the IDEs, I mean, Cursor is growing incredibly quickly. You have others that are doing test generation. And then you had Amazon say that they used AI to migrate.
All that Java 16 to Java 17 or something.
Saved $250 million, right, in a quarter. And so these are unloved categories where startups are succeeding in really transforming the way the industry works. And then you look at like the classic categories, let's say CRM. Sure, you have some businesses there that are growing. They don't yet have the dominance, I would say, or it's not easy to project that they will dominate that category because of this distribution, at least in the short term.
Tell me, let's pull on the accounting one. That's interesting to me. I don't know much about that area. That seems to me an area where significant, like the cost of an error is very, very high, and human supervision is still required for fiduciary and GAAP reasons. So where's the gain coming from? Is it in the more mundane aspects of, coding expenses and accounting, or what's like the lever there?
Yeah, so there, I agree with you. The large language models, why would we apply them to numbers? It's a good question. The first place where it's really useful is just the ingestion of the document. So it turns out that Gemini 2 is sensational at ingesting PDFs and parsing it out accurately.
That's right.
And so if you are running a small business, the number file that you send to your accountant in like this format and that format, that PDF, W2, I-9, et cetera, all of that has to be entered into a system. Then the tax calculation system, those systems those are all rule-based. They've been around for forever, like Walters, Kluwer, and anyway. So a lot of other systems. I don't think the tax calculations will not be impacted by AI because they don't need to be. It's really on the document ingestion. And then we haven't yet seen it, but I suspect we'll probably see it on the customer interface side, like automatic questions like, why do I have to do this quarterly payment or stuff like that. But I think that's less value.
So it's in the sort of unstructured information to structured information, which is manual and labor intensive. And I guess in the legal case, a lot of where it's successful is in sort of like e-discovery, or, it doesn't make any sense to have lawyers at $800 an hour reading 30,000 emails in an IP litigation case or something like that.
Yeah, e-discovery is right. Case research, the drafting of particular letters. So there's one company that drafts what are called, I forget the name, but basically if I'm in an accident, I'm hit by a car, it's called a demand letter.
The personal injury cases.
Yeah, exactly.
What is that? Even Up, right?
Even Up, that's a company. So it's those kinds of workflows where they tend to be very repetitive, but with slight modifications, right? So a rules-based system doesn't apply because the rules-based system is too brittle. And so the flexibility or the fuzziness of the large language model can get you most of the way there.
Okay, makes sense. Let's talk about one thing we've seen with our customers, and this has seemed to die down a lot. There's, at least within the big companies, there was a lot of build versus buy revisiting, and there were a bunch of science projects going on, like, post ChatGPT and sort of for a year. I sort of see with our customers that dying off again, and it's the same sort of issues with in-house software, as it just turns into a good way to incinerate money. And because like your best engineers don't want to work on internal tools, and so they leave, and then you don't have anybody to maintain this tool. It's sort of the same thing. And your best data scientists and research engineers, you want them working on like core things. But do you buy into the whole, there was like this whole end of SaaS thing that everybody you'll say, give me the CRM for Theory Ventures and Claude will just give it to you. Do you take that point of view, or do you think that there's it's just going to be basically a new generation of AI native tools versus a lot of software development going in-house.
Yeah, I don't think we see a lot of software development going in-house. I do think people build, well, okay, so why? Well, yeah, sure, technically it's possible. Like you and I could spin up a CRM here in 2 hours and it would work. I think the reality is all of our software exists within two ecosystems. One, a software ecosystem. That CRM talks to lots of other different kinds of things, like ERP. And if it's not architected well and if there are no standards, well, it doesn't work, right? And so, yeah, sure, maybe we could glom on some more code and glom on some more code. But pretty quickly, you end up with this Edsel, Ford Edsel 11 architecture.
Designed by committee architecture, the classic designed by committee case study. Yeah.
And so, yeah, like sure, maybe you save money on the front end, but long-term management maintenance. And then I think the second thing is, imagine you're a large company. You need to train people on a system where everybody can speak the same language. This is a stage 2 opportunity. This is a stage 3 opportunity. This is the way that we do this kind of translation or whatever it is. And so, yeah, we can all build a whole bunch of different custom stuff, but there are a reason we have standards, and it's to be able to, for humans, we exist in a human ecosystem. And so for us to have a shared language and context. So, there is a universe where all of your data exists in a data lake, and then individual teams have custom integrations and then there's a common layer at the data lake. But I think the second that you have any significant integration with the outside world or other systems across a company becomes very difficult just to design a whole bunch of custom
That's
stuff.
an interesting way to look at it. Yeah. And most business systems today depend heavily on integrations with the outside world, integrations with people, integrations with workflows, and that's challenging.
Yeah. I mean, just think like you hire 100 new sales reps, and then they've all been trained on one particular CRM, and now you have to train them on this thing, and it's changing all the time. And anyway, so the change management part, I think, is the harder part. It's not the technical.
Yeah, which is where we were talking about how, are there I'll go back to that question. I asked for sort of brownfield use cases. I can get, you gave the software development use case in accounting and legal. Those are, those are more of the flavor of replacing mundane tasks that people don't want to do anyway and are very expensive. What do you think about, firing your SDR team or something like that?
Yeah, so every sales leader I talk to says within 2 or 3 years, the number of SDRs as a role will diminish, and it's either by like 70 to 90% or more.
Yeah.
And that's just because a lot of the work of that particular position is automatable, right? Like the pre-research, the understanding, building the personal connections. Did we both go to the same school or whatever it is? Can I identify a need from the outside or automated research? And that's like the equivalent there is a paralegal, right? Doing background research. So I think that's definitely the case. I think there's a huge opportunity for sales training to happen with AI. That'll be a really big deal. And there's a parallel within medicine here. So my father-in-law is a doctor, and we were talking about robotics within medicine. I know very little here, but it used to be that, and when he grew up in the medical industry, he's a retinal surgeon, that when he was training, there was a chief surgeon or whoever was in charge, and that person was operating on a patient, and all the other students were next to him or her, but it was mostly him during those days. And they would learn, and he would say like, okay, pull this part, so here, whatever. Now with robotic surgery, all of those students are sitting watching a doctor from the bleachers. And so there's less and less practical experience. And so there's this training gap that's occurring as a result. The surgery for the patient is much more consistent and arguably better.
Yeah.
But it's harder and harder to train. And so now we have to answer this question, okay, like sales development or customer support. Like my first gig at Google, I was a customer support rep, and that really helped me understand the business. And we look at other companies, the SDR role and the CSM, the customer support reps, are great training grounds to go into lots of other pathways. Mm-hmm. And so as companies grow, the question is, what are those training grounds? What do they look like in the future? Mm-hmm. The orgs themselves need to change.
Yeah, that's a curiosity that I have. When you describe the SDR role and like everybody automates the SDR role, then it sort of becomes just algorithmic trading. Like you've got just a bunch of machines, fighting each other on a market basically. And I wonder as you get into creative areas, like one thing I've reflected on is the film industry, for example. You have like Pixar or something, and you have CGI, and you can generate a film. And so you could say like, well, why would we ever have live actors or explosions or anything? But the reason people love Christopher Nolan films is because he eschews all that. And it's like grossing film that's has just like this intense human personal feeling about it. And I've when we all went remote in the pandemic and it's on Zoom, I was always like just deeply skeptical of like, oh, the world will just be remote now, because it turns out that we're like neurologically wired to like form social groups and build trust by, me looking at you and not knowing you don't have a gun and to like knife me or, shoot me or something. And like that neurological wiring is not changing as fast as the technology is. And of course, there's been this huge over rotation back now to in-office work and let's all get together and all this sort of stuff. So do you think that maybe there's a little bit of over rotation in that way, that like tons of jobs will go away, they'll just be automated? And then I've often thought about it, like maybe just the quality bar goes up, like the quality bar for marketing goes up, the quality bar for storytelling goes up, the quality bar for business execution goes up, because everybody can basically achieve a higher level of baseline by automating everything.
Totally. I mean, let's take SEO for an example.
Yeah.
How do you evaluate SEO? How do you know if your SEO agency is good? Nobody really knows.
When you find out the answer to that question, please let me know. Yeah.
That's right. And so now all of a sudden, lots of people have published on SEO. There's lots of research and we can get to a certain baseline. So now we're operating at a higher level of abstraction. I think the great part about technology is every innovation allows us to operate at a higher level of abstraction. And original software developers wrote in assembly, which was the machine code, and then we created C, and then we created a higher level. Now we're at JavaScript, and we're meeting startups that are talking about programming neural networks. Like you have a neural network, how do you program that directly? I mean, you're not even dealing with lines of code anymore. You're talking about like manipulating a brain, and there's just huge amounts of power that are there, and the limit is just human ingenuity. So I'm really hopeful that jobs will change. But I think this like post-apocalyptic UBI world is it makes no sense. The reality is, like I said before, like the American spirit of innovation and creating business, we will find opportunities. And now all of a sudden, all of us have this incredibly powerful toolkit.
Yeah. I'll ask one more question that may sound like a bit of a trope, but let me see if I can set it up, which is I think in the last 2 years, there's been some question about the durability of revenue of some of these companies. And I would lead that into more reflection on sort of big tech versus little tech to frame a political issue today. Do you think that if the advantages accrue to the big tech companies are so much more powerful now? If you think back, we were talking about 2013, 2014, 2015, they were like 200 billion market cap companies now. Now they're 3 trillion market cap companies. So in principle, they could do anything that they wanted to do. Do you think that it becomes harder to build a long-term, sustaining, durable business with big tech and all of its capital and people and data center advantages? Because they could, in principle, just like generate a full suite of apps and put people on them to make them great, and then off you go. Or do you think it's more like the first wave of SaaS, where a whole new generation of companies eclipsed PeopleSoft and Siebel and Delphi and all those series of on-prem companies?
Yeah, I think they are much bigger. There's no doubt about it, and they have lots of advantages. I think if they were not participating in the ecosystem in an open way, we would be having a different conversation, right? But Google is publishing models, and Microsoft is publishing models, and the open Facebook Meta is publishing models, and so and then all of the cost advantages, like the cost reductions that are passed through, or at least some significant fraction of it are passed through, so you can end up as a user of those platforms with pretty significant margins. It's not like Standard Oil, right, which would be, let's go back 100 years and say like, well, Standard Oil was just increasing pricing because of their market power.
They had a cornered resource, which even in this case, big tech's not able to corner a resource, right?
Exactly. And so that's one. That's one reason why I'm optimistic about the durability of revenue in startups. The second is there's like $1.5 trillion of IT spending today. And if you think about a large company, maybe they spend 5% of their overall revenues on IT, maybe. On average, let's say maybe they spend 30% of their revenue on labor. It's probably higher, but let's.
Yeah.
And so, okay, the market opportunity for AI to automate a bunch of workflow is 6 times larger than the 1.5 trillion of spend today.
Yeah.
Think about the market cap that we could create.
Yeah.
So sure, Microsoft will go after a bunch of categories and CrowdStrike will go after a bunch of categories, but the reality is the demand for software and automation far outstrips their ability to compete.
And getting into labor markets, that's really, as we've learned, the sort of services to automation transition is a messy and a hard one. And it's, in some, I won't say it's easier, but in some sense, it's more home-based to compete as a platform than to go deep into these, vertical labor markets.
Exactly. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard for a big company to justify going and spending money and let's go automate procurement for construction companies.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I like to close up with a couple of quick closing questions. So I'll give you 2. And just give me your quick answer to these. You sound really enthusiastic about startups and AI. What's your advice to aspiring enterprise AI founders that want to get a product into a large organization and have an impact and build a category defining business?
I think you start with a single workflow, basically a single prompt to a machine learning model, and then go and maximize the value of that. I think there's an opportunity to create lots of wedges that way.
I see. That's the sort of SaaS hack, which was take anything that's a spreadsheet and turn it into an app.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Find some little workflow, and then it feels like a consulting gig. You sell the first workflow, then the next workflow, then the next.
Okay. What gets you excited about the future?
Well, I was in a car with my car was driving itself. I was talking to Gemini Live with my family, and I turned to our children and I said, by the time you drive a car, you will not drive a car, and rockets will be launching every single day into space. And I am really jealous that you get to live in that world longer than I will. So I just think the pace of change gets me so excited. We met a company earlier this week that's using large language models to optimize protein folding for cancer research and then medication synthesis. The scope and the speed by which we will start to innovate it'd be inconceivable.
Awesome. Well, a fun and engaging conversation as always. Thank you, my friend.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yep.